My mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. And this is a terrific piece of acoustic observation. The way that Heaney is able to put across a sound here. Held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. So first off, why is the mother holding his hand? Now, traditionally, he's upset, he comes home. Your mother holds your hand because she wants to comfort you. So we may assume the mother is holding the son's hand due to a desire to comfort him, which is plausible. But is she? Because as she's holding his hand, my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. And really the only way to do this is to try to make that sound. You have to hear the sound. There's no way I'm going to do this well, but I'll give it my best shot. So a sigh is easy. Okay, so, sigh. Okay, a tearless sigh. Tearless doesn't really make any difference to the sound, but tearless does raise the question to us of why is she tearless? And either she's tearless because she's not cried at all and isn't crying, which seems highly unlikely to me, or she is tearless because there are no tears left. She's cried so much, her eyes are dry, and she's cried out. That's what tearless for that one means for me. Coughed out angry, tearless sighs. So angry, tearless sigh would be obviously I'm not going to get that perfect, but you can imagine what I'm aiming for here. Okay, coughed out angry, tearless sigh becomes and however badly I do that, suffice to say that anybody making anything approximating that sound is not offering help to anyone. The person making that sound needs help of someone else. So when Heaney tells us, my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs, we only have to hear what angry, tearless sighs sounds like. This and we get this wonderful acoustic demonstration of distress. Once again, bringing up this idea of the rite of passage ceremony that the boy is going through. The father is crying outside, all the old men are taking him seriously as an adult, his mother is asking for help of him. And then the body comes back